the department stated that, consistent with Treasury Board guidance, the fee ratios used in this proposal, and the fee ratios represent the share of the total cost of the program that the industry must bear, would be exactly the same as for prescription drugs. Now that completely ignores the fact that the federal government alone collects over $500 million a year in GST revenues from OTCs and NHPs. Do these revenues not count as a public benefit? And if so, how did we arrive at fee recovery ratios that are exactly the same? So finally, it's worth remembering that unless a proposed fee or service charge meets the requirements of the Service Fees Act, or in this case, the relevant portion of the Food and Drugs Act, that fee is essentially a tax. And I don't need to tell this group that taxes are the unique purview of Parliament. So ultimately, we don't see this proposal as a substitute for the self-care framework. This isn't the time for shortcuts. It really is time to get this job done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. We'll now begin with rounds of questions, starting with the Conservatives for 6 minutes. Dr. Ellis.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here and presenting this very, very important and informative information. You know, we've heard a lot about misinformation and disinformation and et cetera, although I would suggest to folks around this table that what we've just heard presented is incredibly well informed and shows also an industry which is ready, willing, and able to work with government to ensure that it goes forward in a safe and effective manner so that we can have a regulatory framework where everybody wins. And if I might, to Mr. Skelton, through you, Chair, you talked about a system that is world-class with respect to safety and accessibility. And you know, we know very clearly that that other jurisdictions would like to have that. Have you ever been part of those discussions of talking with folks around the world to say, hey, what you have, we would like to have, and could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Chair, we have. I think one of the roles that we play as the representative for this industry in Canada is to liaise with groups around the world. And in those discussions, I will convey that we are undoubtedly seen as a standard for how to balance consumer interest and the interest of businesses in this country. What has been startling for me over the past few years is how disillusioned our international groups have become at the changes or the proposals that are being made. To the point I think that has been made multiple times to this committee, this is something where other countries, other regulators had looked to emulate. I think there's discussions we've had with European regulators. There's discussions we've had with Australia, with New Zealand, where they continue to ask and look for guidance on how did we get here, because they'd like to get here as well. But the concerns over the last few years have been, please don't dismantle, which was something that was working so well because you were seen as a leader globally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skelton, and again through you, Chair, to Mr. Harrington. We heard very clearly when you talked about these changes by virtue of the nature of how they've been proposed, or as some of us might say, rammed through as they are, amounts to another tax by virtue of the way that the Liberal government has done this and forced its acceptance upon Canadian small and medium-sized businesses. I just wonder, for the benefit of people out there watching, and I know there's many out there from this industry who are very concerned about this, could you kind of review that with us and the unfair nature of it and the perhaps illegality thereof?
Sure. And thank you for the question. Mr. Chairman, when cost recovery was first introduced in Health Canada's health products area in 1994, I was an active participant at that point. We saw a second revision of the cost recovery regime in the decade just past. And in each of those cases, the government of Canada has set down very, very clear rules that distinguishes between cost recovery fees, regulatory charges, service fees, et cetera, and creates very, very clear rules for how they have to be constructed. So, for example, the costing exercise is something that Health Canada was supposed to share in advance of releasing a cost recovery proposal with industry on multiple touch points. That did not happen. We did not see the costing analysis until after the proposal was reached. There's the whole matter that I raised in my testimony around the fee ratios. If it's a public versus private benefit equation, we're having a really difficult time understanding how the fee ratios can be the same for the prescription drug program where there is no taxes and where, in fact, almost 50% of all expenditures are by governments, are out of the public purse. And yet we wind up with exactly the same cost recovery ratios. So this proposal does not meet those requirements in our view. And according to Treasury Board's own guidance on this, that means it is effectively a tax and outside of the scope of the Service Fees Act, or in this case, because cost recovery is now done by a ministerial order, it's not even subject to Treasury Board review before approval. So all of those problems essentially make this, I think, a very tricky matter.
Thank you very much, Chair. And back to you, Mr. Skelton, if I could. We've talked a lot about costs here, and I know that I mentioned during that our motion, which was adjourned by the Liberal side to get rid of these regulations, I did note that our team here tried to calculate the cost per businesses. Can you tell a little bit about the efforts that you've made on behalf of your industry to help those in the industry understand how much this might cost them?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. We've obviously, since we've been made aware, and as Mr. Harrington noted, that was very late in the process, and I think counters to some of the commitments that we had received from the department, but we've been working quite diligently since then. Obviously, it will impact every individual business uniquely, depending on their piece, but I can give a few examples of specific members that we've got. The labeling updates themselves, unlike potentially when it impacted the OTC industry, given these are small businesses, many of them are co-packed, some of them are sharing equipment. The updates to that machinery alone, never mind label stock and things that will take time to work through inventory, can be in the realm of hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have one member who recently underwent it on his own accord, and small business, again, would fall into that category, but estimated that it would cost him an additional $250,000 to go through and make the labeling updates. I can provide another example regarding cost recovery. Multiple members have gone now through the due diligence of calculating the costs on an annual basis, and they are examples like $450,000 a year, $560,000 a year. And these are annual fees for businesses that, given the competitive nature of the natural health product industry, this is not like the pharmaceutical industry. There are a lot of businesses who have to carry a lot of different products to remain viable, and these are costs that they simply don't have in margin for their businesses today. And I think that was clearly articulated in the study we've commissioned at the beginning of this year, which I'll remind committee are startling statistics. 1 in 5 of these businesses saying that they won't be financially viable. That was only on the back of the labeling updates. That was done prior to the cost recovery.
No, I think certainly I don't think anybody would question the fact that one of the roles of government is to protect the public. And certainly there are concerns about natural health products, and between May 1st, 2021 and April 30th, 2023, the Canadian Vigilance Program received 772 domestic reports of serious adverse effects from natural health products, and that was without Vanessa's law, which requires hospitals to report severe adverse effects. Furthermore, between 2004 and 2023, the Canadian Vigilance Program had received 8,625 reports where the suspected product was a natural health product. Over 5,000 of those 8,000 were identified as serious by the reports. And certainly we know that a number of natural health products have potentially adverse effects. St. John's wort, there's a whole bunch of things with that, including interactions with SSRIs, which are commonly used in treatment of depression, and can cause serotonin syndrome, which can be deadly. there's a number of drugs which are natural health products which cause hepatotoxicity, liver toxicity, for example, pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which includes comfrey and echinacea. Ginkgo biloba has both anticoagulant and antiplatelet effects. So I think there's very significant reasons for the government wanting to protect the health of Canadians. Now, when it comes to the cost recovery program, and I wanted to ask both Mr. Harrington and Mr. Skeleton about this, apparently, and this goes back to between March 2021 and March 2022, there was a pilot project that looked at compliance with good manufacturing practices amongst natural health product manufacturers and found there was issues of compliance in 42% of those companies inspected. Does that not occur to you to be a significant number, which would require better policing of good manufacturing practice among natural health products manufacturers? So maybe quickly on that, are you not impressed by those numbers? I'm certainly impressed by those numbers, and it certainly suggests to me that there ought to be more inspections.
No, I would agree. I think the industry has for a long time had a concern with Health Canada's approach, which is very heavy on pre-market activities, the licensing system, which is, quite frankly, in most categories, heavily backlogged right now, but that they have not been enforcing in the field. And so, the authorities are there already, pre-Vanessa's law. I don't think, personally, we don't have an issue with Vanessa's law, but the authorities are there. The department has continued to emphasize the pre-market activities, and that is the problem. In terms of enforcing and inspections, that has been part of the self-care framework discussions from the outset, and it's something that we strongly support. The thing is we've been talking about that for 7 or 8 years. What we have got instead of that is a cost recovery proposal that doesn't spell out how that's going to happen, that hands the bill to industry, but has not, again, put the program together to ensure that this
now on the cost recovery program, and I assume you're all kind of businessmen or associated with businesses, or you're here to promote the interests of businesses. And now I think it was you, Mr. Skeleton, has said that this is a tax that we're putting on natural health products. Now, if we don't do it in terms of cost recovery, which is making the industry pay for it, then is that not making all of the rest of us Canadians pay for it, which means increased taxes, which I would assume you're against? So it would seem to me that let the producer bear the cost rather than people within the public. Mr. Harrington, you're shaking your head, so I have the feeling you're going to give the answer I like, but
either way, the consumer ultimately pays. So I don't think there's a question mark around that. You're right. Whether it's charged to industry or whether it comes in the form of a tax, the issue is get the regulatory reforms in place so that we have a comprehensive approach that deals with a rebalancing of this pre versus post-market and inspections issue.
Most Canadians would turn around and say that take health food products wouldn't have had a clue what went on when C-47 went down. And all of a sudden, if you hadn't gone through that with a fine-tooth comb to go through that issue, and where that, what that bill did basically is what I love to use, and a word that I put through in the House is that I've made up, which is dyspocketnesia, which is what this government does, which is take money from this pocket and put it into that pocket. And this pocket is the public's pocket and putting it into their pocket and then forgetting to do it. And ultimately, when you take words and you create them, here we have an issue of a government that doesn't engage with you. So, Ms. Skelton, for you as an industry, when did you first hear about these steps, and how much have you, has the government come to you to say, hey, we need to talk to you about this?
Okay, Mr. Skelton, we're at time for this round, but please, 30 seconds if you could.
Yeah, I think I would reference back to the congratulation on this committee for the work it was done in 98 and 2004 on the extensive consultation, hundreds of testimonies, patient groups, and the complete lack of engagement on this one. We didn't hear about cost recovery until May 11th, and it was gazetted on May 12th.